Hi, I'm very okay. You are watching the stream. In June 2017, a Grenfell Tower fire killed 72 people. This week, the public inquiry resumed after taking a break for COVID-19 lockdowns in the UK. So what we want to do on today's program is find out how is the investigation going, and will the people who were around Grenfell Tower, the survivors, the families, the community, will they see justice for Grenfell? I'm going to say hello to the guests. The guests will introduce themselves to you. Hello, Salish. Tell everybody who you are.
Hello, I'm Sailesh Mehta. I'm a barrister. I have some expertise in human rights law, criminal law, and also fire regulation law. I advise fire brigades and also advise companies in relation to fire.
Good to have you in today's conversation. Hello, Loki. Great to have you on the stream. Introduce yourself. Why are you important in this conversation? Go ahead.
Thank you for having me. I'm a hip hop artist and political campaigner. I witnessed the fire. I live next door to the tower, and I lost a friend of mine and his family in the fire.
Thank you so much for joining us on the stream. And Peter, we couldn't really do this conversation without you. Tell everybody who you are.
My name's Pete Apps. I'm a journalist. I'm a deputy editor of Inside Housing magazine, which is a publication in the UK which primarily covers the social housing sector.
So, gents, it's been 3 years since the Grenfell Tower fire. What have you seen that's tangible, that has happened, that has changed? Peter, you start.
Well, I think the short of that is not enough, to be honest. Tonight, there'll be somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people that go to sleep in a building with a dangerous cladding system on its walls. And there hasn't been an awful lot done to remedy that situation. The money that the government has tried to put into it has been hasn't quite been enough, and there hasn't been much by way of legislative change either. We've had a lot of consultations, we've had a lot of promises made, but I think that much of what's happened since the fire has really maintained the status quo rather than challenge it. And like I say, the most important thing, which is making sure no other buildings could have a similar fire as a result of having a cladding system like that on their walls. The progress with that has been incredibly slow.
Right. I'm just looking here at my laptop. This headline, Salish, I was a firefighter at Grenfell. Why do I see towers in flammable cladding across Britain? And look at the date here. That's just a couple of weeks ago, 19 June 2020. Salish, what's going on here?
So to get back to the earlier question while answering yours, firstly, the Grenfell fires had huge repercussions, not only in this country, but internationally. Because it's not just London that has such high-rise buildings with cladding that is potentially fatal. It's in almost every major city. And so what others are doing is they're watching our inquiry to see what happens. One aspect of this inquiry is that there has been some action. So it's not been all complete lack of action. And so a number of companies who own high-rise blocks of flats have taken some urgent action. Local authorities, particularly in London, but elsewhere in Manchester and other major cities, have already started some months ago, in fact, 3 years ago, as soon as the fire occurred, have started to investigate which buildings have the most dangerous cladding. Not enough is done. So I agree with Peter entirely that there are still lots and lots of buildings with dangerous cladding. And of course, that fire officer who says that he still sees cladding on the outside of the building is absolutely right. But on a positive note, quite a lot has happened, but not enough.
Loki, you live right by Grenfell Tower. How close are you?
I would say less than 100 meters, and I directly see it from my front room. If I was able to respond to your initial question, though, the change in regulation that we have seen is to say that only A1 and A2 materials can be used. Now, the Royal Institute of British Architects have problematized that, saying that A2, limited combustibility, that is a grade of building material
Okay, I was just about to ask you what A1 and A2 materials are.
Okay.
Go ahead.
It still leaves people in a precarious position. We have seen evacuation policy from the fire service change. So you haven't seen stay put applied when in, for example, Worcester Park, a part of outskirts of London, you saw a fire where similar material or dangerous material, not exactly similar
Right.
material, led to a massive fire. And the fire service got people out of the building rather than keeping to a stay put policy. What worries me about this is there may be an idea on the part of some in the construction industry that if you change evacuation policy on behalf of the fire service, if you now have 24-hour waking watch companies set up to focus on those buildings, if on top of that you're in a situation where even the cladding that does get removed, in some cases, is being removed by a company called Ryden, who was responsible for the refurbishment at Grenfell Tower, what you see is the people who were part of the problem being offered as part of the solution. You're seeing Berkeley Group already saying that the A1, A2 should be pushed back on, and actually it would impede enterprise to have this kind of very light touch regulation on the building industry. And let's not forget that change to A1 and A2 was fought for, but tirelessly by Ahmed al-Gawahiri, who lost his mother and his sister in the fire. It was a concession that bereaved had to really fight for. And still, as was said before, it's not enough.
We are on YouTube right now. Thank you, YouTube, for being part of this conversation. Go ahead, and I'll come back to YouTube. Go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up on what Loki was saying there, in that the UK government was actually moving towards a position where it wouldn't ban combustible materials from the outside of tall buildings. It didn't want to take that very limited but necessary step, which
okay. So I'm just a Londoner, and I'm just thinking, why would you not want to do that? Why would you not ban combustible material from the outside of a building?
The argument from the industry has been that you can insulate a building much more easily with a plastic-based insulation. You can do it more cost-effectively, and they have various tests and so on which say that you can use this stuff in a safe way. I think the problem is, as Grenfell showed, is that you might be able to get something through a test in a laboratory, but it might be very, very different once that's been installed by a building company on the outside who are looking to protect costs and aren't necessarily doing the work properly. And the whole testing regime has come under a lot of scrutiny about the transparency of that since Grenfell.
Yeah, Pete, as you're speaking, we're looking at. It's really hard to see. I don't want to play this too often in the show. We know what the Grenfell Tower fire looks like. So King of the Catnap, who's on YouTube right now, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, says it is quite obvious that the British government has not given this any priority. Salish.
But may I answer that question and also come back to something that Loki touched upon, light touch regulation. Now, light touch regulation is a mantra that lawyers such as me hear constantly. What it really means is that the government decided many years ago, and it's not just this government, successive governments, decided to take less and less of an active role in safety. And so light touch regulation is just a phrase which means we, the government, or we, the fire brigade, or we, the health and safety executive, will not supervise safety in the way that we used to. We will leave it to the big companies, the big corporations, the owners of these high-rise blocks of flats. Will leave it to others on the basis that these others will supervise themselves. What's become abundantly clear, and it was clear to people like those on the ground, such as Loki, no doubt, and certainly lawyers, that light touch regulation rarely succeeds. It is just a way of offloading responsibility. As a result of Grenfell, and hopefully as a result of the inquiry, we'll have some rebalancing of the light touch regulation scenario. so that we may
Right.
have a little heavier touch regulation to try to protect the lives of people.
Let's have a look at that inquiry. You can follow that inquiry at Grenfell Inquiry on Twitter. It will tell you what time the breaks are. Have a look back here on my laptop. What time the breaks are, who is up. This is from Wednesday. What time lunch is, and then it even will give you the link so that you can watch it. Loki, I know you've been watching it. There's a question here on Twitter, and I'm wondering if you, because you become such an expert on building regulations and cladding.
Yeah.
Justice for Belly Mujinga says, I don't understand, and this comes out of the public inquiry, how a whole senior fire engineer didn't know that the cladding was dangerous. Please make it make sense, Loki.
Well, I have to say that anything that I've learned during this process has been largely thanks to the work of Peter and others at Inside Housing. They have been an absolutely vital and essential channel through which the rest of us can try and understand what has gone on. And I think any of those hoping to get to grips with what happened, really, it's incumbent that they really focus on Inside Housing as much as possible. So I actually think Peter would be better positioned to answer this question.
Pete, senior fire engineer, didn't know that the cladding was dangerous. Is that just a big old fib?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for saying that, Loki. I really appreciate it. On the issue there, the gentleman she's talking about is called Terry Ashton. And I think what we've learned from his evidence is something about what the role fire engineers play in the construction process, certainly on the Grenfell project, in that he wasn't actually a trained fire engineer. He had a background in what we call building control, which is the process of signing off a building as compliant. And he explained his role as much more about making sure that the proposal would be signed off. They think the words he used were achieving compliance for the client. Then what you and I would understand the role of a senior fire engineer to be, which is to make sure that the project is fire safe. In some senses, those two things are the same thing, because complying with the rules means, in some instances, making sure that the building is safe. But there is a tension between it. He was involved also at an early stage, and due to cost pressures, the refurbishment, as everyone knows,
Can I just ask
was
you
done
to
on
cut to the chase here? Why would he not understand this?
Okay.
Was it
so the refurbishment was done on a tight budget. A contractor called Ryden came in 2014 to take it over and do it for less money than it had been previously assessed that it would cost. At that point, they stopped using Exover's services as a fire engineer. Terry Ashton was therefore dropped from the project. At the stage he was involved in it, his argument is
was he fibbing? Was he fibbing, Pete? Let me push you. In your best analysis as a journalist,
you are professional journalists, and I can't stand up.
You can't
I would love
say,
to
you
be
can't
able.
say.
I would,
Right,
I'd
but what
love
you
to
can
work
say,
in a
I'm
country
going to
where
move
you're
on,
allowed
Pete,
to
if you can't wrap this up, because that was an honest question for somebody who really cares about the families and the survivors. I just don't get it.
I'm trying to answer it as clearly as I possibly can. I mean, but the picture is
We
that
don't have a certain level of this show to go there, Pete.
okay, we'll move on.
Let me show you something that I know that you care deeply about. And I'm surprised it's come up again, because when the public inquiry started, a lot of the families said we need to take into account racism, institutionalized racism, when we look at what happened with the Grenfell Tower fire. This is a headline, Pete, that you wrote. Survivors' lawyers call for racial discrimination to be considered as a factor in Grenfell fire. It has come up in the public inquiry this week. This is Leslie Thomas, who represents the families and survivors for the Grenfell Tower, talking about institutionalized racism. Let's have a listen.
It is the institutional racism that keeps black people locked in dilapidated slum tenements, subject to the daily prey of exploitative slum landlords, merchants, loan sharks, and discriminatory real estate agents. The society either pretends it does not know of this latter situation or is in fact incapable of doing anything meaningful about it. And a majority of the Grenfell residents who died were people of colour. And we know that. The statistics are glaring and provide a stark and continuous reminder that Grenfell is inextricably linked with race. It is the elephant in the room.
Salish, I'm not even sure that it's the elephant in the room. It feels like it's probably the room. This is Dawn Butler MP. This is a tweet that she put out quite recently. And I know there were family members who were pushing for racism to be part of the public inquiry. The inquiry's already started. Dawn Butler Brent says, you must allow survivors and family members into the proceedings. They're watching on YouTube right now. You have to consider race as a contributory factor. Consider class as a contributory factor. Please show compassion. What are the chances that in this public inquiry that it will be able to take into account race and class? Because it's already started. Salish?
Race, class, poverty are key factors, and there is statistical evidence that we've just heard Mr. Thomas talking about. They should have been part of the inquiry. And of course, it's the elephant. The problem is it's not even the elephant in the room, because right at the beginning, when the terms of reference for the inquiry were being drafted, that elephant was manhandled out of the room and has been locked away. It's the terms of the inquiry that the judge drafted, that Morbick drafted, that precludes hearing evidence about that. When the head of the inquiry, Morbick, wrote to Theresa May saying, these are the terms of the inquiry that I think you should encapsulate in my reference, Theresa May wrote back saying, yes, I agree. They excluded these wider areas, and therefore they will not be looked at.
Loki, I'm just looking at this. This is from the monitoring group, and it's a very stark image and really relates back to what is happening in the United States, what is happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. And this is the message on Grenfell Tower earlier on this morning, and this was from an earlier tweet. We can't breathe. As a resident, you see this tower. When you see this, make the connection between racism and then what happened 3 years ago.
Grenfell is a national scandal which has been camouflaged as merely a local scandal. Now, the local scandal, I would say, yes, there's a contributing factor of racism. The building itself is believed to be named after Francis Wallace Grenfell, who killed for the British Empire in South Africa, in Egypt, in Sudan, who occupied positions in India and in Ireland. The tower overlooks Bramley Road, which was the road where you had 4 days of race rioting, thanks to former Nazi Oswald Mosley encouraging what were termed as teddy boys at that time to firebomb the houses of people that came in the Windrush generation from the Caribbean, Ladbroke Grove being one of the only places that they were able to rent property. The way in which race is not a factor is in the national scandal. If you have 500,000 people, who many of whom, if not all, as reported by The Guardian and Inside Housing, who are leaseholders across the country, if you have, as some have estimated, between 5 to 10% of the population currently in houses in which the walls are dangerous to them, the problem with Grenfell is it is exceptionalized as just being about our community, when it should have been generalized and understood as something that, yes, this community, where there's a huge amount of North African, Middle Eastern people, are actually campaigning for the safety of everyone in this country and their homes. Unfortunately, the identity of those who died was weaponized against them in the aftermath of the fire in order to alienate them from the rest of the population in this country. Had people in this country been able to see themselves in our community and see themselves in the victims and in the bereaved, then there would have been a better chance of building a critical mass to demand real action to remove this stuff. There's leaseholders in Croydon told they had to pay £40,000 to get this stuff removed off of their building. They have done everything according to Margaret Thatcher's idea of a democracy of homeowners. It's the same in Greenwich. It's the same in many places across the country. However, those people are also not being listened to. Is it, and I would say this also to Labour councillors, let's not forget that the councils which are ignoring many of these people across the country are Labour councils. Manchester has a higher rate of buildings like this than anywhere else in the country. Yes, on the local level and the local side of the scandal, I think race is a contributing factor. On the national side of the scandal, we need to take this far more seriously and realize that it cuts across many different sectors of society, including homeowners and middle-class people too.
We are, goodness me, at the 3rd year anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire. There was a memorial just a couple of weeks ago. Moira Samuels, who is a community activist and a campaigner, was there. This is what that moment meant to her. And we spoke to her a little bit earlier, and this is what she told us.
In 2020, we find ourselves in a world that yet again holds a mirror up to the inequalities in our society. Grenfell did exactly that. It held a mirror to the fact that actually the residents were not listened to, the fact that they predominantly came from a Muslim background. We look at the judicial system in America, the justice system, the brutality of the police, and we reflect on the fact that actually Black lives mattered, both here in Grenfell and they matter in America. They matter all over the world where Black people face discrimination, brutality and death. They matter also because we now see that actually a disproportionate number of Black people are dying from COVID-19.
Pete, I want to tap into your expertise as a housing expert. On YouTube, hi Lloyd Myatt. Lloyd Myatt says that every so often we always appear to have a Grenfell type tragedy with very little or no accountability. Is an inquiry appropriate for this kind of housing tragedy, Pete? What do you think?
I think on the one hand, yes, because there have been some really important revelations from the inquiry that have now been made public and will be part of the public record forever. Everyone can now see the emails from Arconic, who produced the cladding, which demonstrate that they knew that there was a risk to those products and that it fell below the standards that it was advertised as holding. That certain people within Arconic knew that. We've seen emails that have said all sorts of other things, and you would never see those without a public inquiry. They just wouldn't be made. They wouldn't be released. It's really important that we know the truth about what happened. I think that in order for us to say that justice has been done and in order for change to come about, we do need to see criminal prosecutions. I think that the most important thing in terms of making the construction industry change is the knowledge that if they create a situation like this and people lose their lives because of it, they will pay with criminal sanction. That will focus their minds. And so the inquiry is a positive force and will deliver, hopefully, answers to some of the questions that people have. But what it can't be is a block on prosecutions, and part of that means finishing it in a reasonable length of time. Right. At the moment, it's set to go on until around 2022.
Sure.
May I just balance what Peter has just said about the usefulness of the inquiry?
Right at the end of the show, one sentence, if you can do it, go for it, please. Thank you.
A cynic would say the purpose of any public inquiry created by a Prime Minister is to take the spotlight off the government.
All right. Thank you, Salish. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Loki. I'm going to end on a low-key track. It's called The Ghosts of Grenfell. It also features Mike Khalil. And at the end of this track, you see the names of the people who died in the Grenfell Tower fire. I cannot think of a better way to end this episode of the stream. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll leave you with The Ghosts of Grenfell.
Where is Yasin al-Wahhabi? Where is his brother Mehdi? Where is his sister Nur Huda? Where is their mother? And where is their father?
Where is Noura Jamal? Where is her husband Hashim?
Where is their children?
Yahya, Firdaus, and Yaqub.
Where is Nadia Loueda?
Where is Steve Power?
Where is Dennis Murphy? Where is Marco Cortado?
Where is Gloria Trevisan?
Where is Amal and her daughter?